pages. We're like, we trained for this all summer.
Really? Yes.
So this weekend, we're not gonna let that part all of the fun.
Need a 10-minute babysitting session.
Oh my God.
Right.
That's what I'm a little bit worried about. I was having such a hard time falling asleep today. I drank way too much water and way too much coffee. I'm like, oh, it's gonna be a miserable 3 hours.
How are you?
If you're ready, we're
How are you?
gonna start it, and then okay. So, all right. Well, good evening, everybody. Welcome to the work session for September 3rd, 2024. First time on our work session agenda is the 2025 budget discussion, capital projects, and enterprise fund review. Staff.
Good evening, Mayor Clark, members of City Council. So tonight is our last standalone focused budget conversation before we look at citywide budget. Our goals, if I can be the first one to turn the things on. Our goals tonight are to look at asset management plan items, capital plans for the various funds, and then we will do a deeper review of the enterprise funds tonight as well. And so just to take a step back to general fund and where we're at with that, we were able to incorporate almost $200,000 of funding for asset management items. So smaller equipment replacement things, maintenance items that we try to fund $100,000 or $200,000 each year when we can. A lot of these items look familiar because they were on the one-time funding list. So as City Council last time identified the priorities, then I went back and tried to figure out where we could fund those priorities from. So we were able to add a couple of things onto this. That top one being a boiler replacement here at this building. So I understand from our facility staff, Hector's been trying to get this on the funding list for a couple of years. We're on a borrowed time with that very large boiler that services this building. So wanted to make sure we had some funding included in there for next year. And then we also included office chairs in operations. Apparently office furniture hasn't been a high priority for some of our operations buildings. Has been sorely overlooked for many years, so we need to just go through and make sure that folks in those buildings have proper furniture. And lastly, at the bottom of this list, vehicle and equipment safety lighting as well. So we've identified some needs to standardize and improve the lighting for safety reasons on our operations vehicles. So just under $200,000 that we'll incorporate into our operating section of our budget to fund these items. And then from the one-time projects, the list that you guys looked at your previous meeting was about $5.8 million of one-time. We're going to shake the piggy bank. We're going to use that savings account, if you will, put some of that money to work next year. And so I wanted to show you everything that was included in what would be spent from the general fund reserves. Very little change. There's 2 slides that make up that total, just largest to smallest dollar item. The only changes here that we were able to incorporate that got it a little over that $6 million figure, about halfway down, you'll see a $115,000 item. That's a unit number 1110. It's an Isuzu truck that we currently use for mosquito spraying and some other items. Cameron would like to replace that with a GMC 3500 with a dump bed or a flatbed dump body on that truck as well. And it would have a snow plow attachment. So it'd be a truck that we can use for mosquito spraying or snow removal for lots of items. So he'd like to replace a truck that is only utilized for part of the year with something that can be utilized year round. Awesome concept. We had gone back to Cameron and said, okay, if we're able to squeeze out a couple $100,000, can you identify some pieces of equipment that are high on your priority list because they're costly to service, they're really hard to find parts, those sorts of things. And he did provide 5 items. We were only able to incorporate into the funding his number 1 item, and it was that. You'll see at the bottom of this list, we still have that $100,000 for the mill levy campaign. And after speaking with Cody last week, we've also added $100,000 for a sales tax campaign. So I titled it blanketly. That is ideally for us to start looking at renewal for the 1% road tax funding that we know is so critical to our street projects here. So as we look at how do we investigate what the right option is for the mill levy, let's also have the funding set aside out of our savings account so that we have the opportunity to start future planning for how we would renew that 1% road tax as well. Lastly on this slide, the addition of a $100,000 strategic master plan as well. So as we're trying to create a good roadmap for how we do things, how we have some tangible progress as the city grows, that this would be something that council could work on, maybe a 5-year, shorter term strategic master plan to build in what those steps look like as we're doing master plans in all these other areas. What does that really look like as far as where the city's going? Many of the items on this list were also included in that one-time funding that we looked at the previous meeting. I think we did add a $40,000 riding wheel roller to be used for road work. Always looking for opportunities for us to have the proper equipment for patch repairs, pothole repair, things like that on our roads so that we can address them quickly and safely and efficiently as possible. Look through real quick. I think that was the only new piece. We haven't specifically talked about the $59,000 item on this list. That's phase 4 of landscaping at the community complex building here. So as we're going through and working with Northern Water to put in that water smart landscaping, there has been historically a grant component to this as well. We don't have that in the revenue yet. If that comes to fruition, then that would be a bonus that we could get some assistance in paying for that. So that's the entire list that will be utilized from the $6 million of our general fund reserves. And the reason we were able to accomplish funding for $6 million as opposed to the 5.8 that we showed you last time is we got an additional $350,000 from severance tax and federal mineral lease income last week. So that was additional over what we had budgeted for this year. So unanticipated revenue this year does add to our fund balance this year that will start our fund balance for next year's budget. Wanted to mention here, there's still over $500,000 of just very tangible, identified requests that remain unfunded. And you'll see those unit numbers at the bottom where Cameron's other 4 top priority items, some facility improvement items here. If we have additional revenue at year end, when we come back in the spring of 25, we can look at either utilizing one-time revenues or those excess revenues for some of these items and see what we might be able to accomplish or what might be priorities at that time. We'll try to keep these things on our priority list. As funding becomes available, we'll start here. We'll revisit what these things were that remained unfunded, if they're still a high priority, as we look at any kind of future needs. Just to show you in the numbers what this looks like, and I think I say this every time, but I'm sure these numbers have changed even slightly since a few days ago when I put this together. But we do anticipate starting 2025 with a beginning fund balance of just shy of $13 million. Our revenue and transfers in total just above $21 million. Our personnel expense, almost $2 million, and that does include the addition of the 2 parks technicians, 1 facilities technician as well. Our SNS, our supplies and services costs, were about $6.5 million. We still have $200,000 transfer out to the fire district. Our $198,000 of asset management items there, total $21.1 million of expenditures and transfers out of the general fund. So you'll see there that first blue number, we're at least a positive net result of operation of $17,438. So we've really utilized all the buckets we can to maximize that revenue. You'll see our capital and one-time expenditures. There's that little over $6 million list we just reviewed. That'll leave our ending fund balance at $6.9 million. General fund reserves that council had directed us towards was $6,750,000. That does leave an available fund balance of $193,000. So we're above our reserves. We've incorporated what we had committed and set aside for the police station in the current year budget. You'll see that in the year-end budget revision. So we've really captured and addressed each of the items that council has asked us to look at as we develop this budget. Moving on to some of the capital projects that are not in the general fund. On that list from the general fund was the new columbarium at the cemetery. So if you'll remember, the project cost was $150,000. The cemetery perpetual care fund does have $50,000 that we would like to recommend that this fund kind of cost shares that project with the general fund for. It'll still leave an ending fund balance of about $49,000 in that fund, and a portion of all of the cemetery plot sales and the columbarium niche sales do go to this fund for capital and maintenance items of the cemetery. So that appears to be a proper use of that funding. In our park impact fund, we just have one park for design and construction of North Point Park. Next year, a little over $700,000 is what we've set aside for that project, and that would leave an ending fund balance in that fund of just shy of $2 million still after that. We have some large street projects going on next year, the largest being completion of Phase 2B of 37th Street widening. And so we're using all the funding sources available to us for that project. So street impact funds, our CIP streets or street construction fund, as well as some significant dollars out of the 1% road tax fund to make that project happen. We're still tightening exactly what dollar amount of road maintenance will be accomplished next year from the 1% road tax fund, but millions of dollars will be put into use next year from that fund for road maintenance as well. So it'll be a good year for street projects. Every other year we do include funding to do our pavement condition scanning so we can see what that PCI index looks like as we continue to work on our roads in the city. And then we do have design of a traffic signal at 23rd Avenue and 42nd Street funded by our CIP Streets Fund next year. So we'll do design next year and then construction the year following. So we do have both funded. Additionally, out of the Conservation Trust Fund, we have a couple of larger lumps, so annual park improvements, park structure repairs, and park furnishings. So Park and Rec Director Ty Hamer would like to kind of have some dollars set aside. We used to just have it as like picnic table replacement and then a park or playground surface repairs. This will give him the ability to go through and prioritize some of the needs in the parks and playgrounds and have the available funding to address things as they come up. So each year he'd like this to be a funding structure so that he can go through and continue to make improvements in all those areas. Lastly, out of Conservation Trust, we do have $500,000 set aside for replacements to playground items at Renaissance Park. That's a pretty heavily used one, and that one is starting to age as well. So as we're doing great things in our parks and playgrounds, this is one that would need attention next as well. In our food tax fund, we do have the police station construction. So each year we've budgeted for an amount of both bond revenue as well as the construction expense in those funds, or in that fund rather. And because that construction hasn't been started, we're not carrying forward the money, we're not adding to it. Rather, we're kind of coming each year in the original budget with a dollar amount and hoping to get it rolling. So now that we're back in design and that project's moving again, we do anticipate a $35 million both revenue from bond sale that will be funded with sales tax from food for home consumption as well as the construction piece.
Just real quick, as we look at the Renaissance Park replacements, $500,000. In speaking with Ty Hamer, our Parks and Recreation Director, one of the things that he had mentioned was because my concern was the big holes in the soft surfacing. There's especially around the merry-go-round, and Ty said that they looked at their spreadsheet. That park would be the next one on the list for replacement because of its age. It's nearing, I want to say, nearing 10 years old on that one, and so his concern was don't replace the pour in place or the soft surfacing if we're already to a point where we have to go through and replace the actual equipment there. So that's why we're recommending that replacement of that entire park.
Thank you for that addition. All right, last topic, and then hopefully there's some questions. This is where we kind of have some work to do, though, is looking at some of our enterprise funds. So we do have water, wastewater, and storm. Good news is you've already done a lot of the work for the revenue fund, or the water fund rather, and last week we heard from FCS Group regarding the recommendations from the water rate study. So we have gone through and updated the water fund and that long range plan with the recommendations from that study. We do plan to implement the rate changes January 1st. This remains unchanged. Just wanted it documented here as what those rates would look like, that FCS put together this slide for us. And I wanted to just remind us that 49% of those monthly bills have a average usage of less than the 4,000 gallons, moving toward that lower tier model to give that opportunity for the lower water users. And then again, as a reminder, 63% of our monthly bills will see a decrease, and 90% will see an increase of $9 or less per month. So that's been built into our financial plan. And what it looks like in summary is a total revenue in the water fund of $10.9 million next year. We do break that down into some sources or buckets of revenue still, $7.9 million of which is an operating revenue to the water fund. We anticipate a small amount of water sales out of our EQR bank, and then we have almost $3 million of system maintenance and expansion revenue. So that would be more of the variable use consumption revenue as opposed to some of that base revenue that's in our operating revenue bucket. And there at the bottom, there's multiple reasons why we need this revenue in the water fund. We want to make sure we have ample, clean, good water supply for our community. That takes a fair amount of infrastructure to make sure that we can get the water to our homes, and then the maintenance for all of those water pipes and valves and everything else. It's a fairly expansive system as well. So we do hold operating reserves as well as major maintenance reserves in the water fund. And additionally, we hold a portion of the fund balance or the cash balance in the water fund for the Greeley expansion cap. So as we grow, we know we will need a larger amount of treated water. And so we do hold money for very specific purposes in the water fund. With this revenue, we will be able to accomplish the addition of 2 water fund technicians, personnel in the water fund. They've done a really great job this year of identifying some additional maintenance, regulatory work that we need to continue to do on our water system that will require additional personnel to accomplish. We have $138,000 of asset management items again included in this fund. So those 2 new people do require at least 1 work truck. I think ideally they would like 2. This is a team that works fairly independently in 1 truck, and so maybe we'll see if we can buy a second truck next year. It's something that we'll need to continue to push towards in the water fund. And they've also identified some machinery and equipment to help with some of those regulatory and maintenance items. A slided water tank for one of their tandem trucks that'll help to also do dust suppression on roads. It'll be able to be used for a multitude of things. Some flushing tools and valve exercising machines, and attachments for working on the ditch on the mini excavator. A large amount of capital projects in the water fund planned for this next year, the largest being our continued participation in the NISP, or the Northern Integrated Supply Project. They're a little over $1.2 million, so that's the largest dollar amount that we've paid on any one annual year into NISP. Those costs are getting higher as construction's starting and as that work is beginning as well. They're asking for $340,000 to purchase a wheeled excavator to help with some of the water maintenance items. There continues to be water line replacements, work on the various phases of 37th Street, identified backflow replacement at Neville's Crossing, annual fire hydrant replacements, automation of the Evans Ditch headgate. It needed some repairs as well, so it's automation and repairs. Water line replacement on Cheyenne Drive, valve on Pawnee and Kiowa, and then some various locations that additional SCADA would be installed throughout the city. So some pretty big projects to keep going and push forward in the maintenance in the water fund. In summary, the health of that fund is very stable. So the beginning water fund cash balance in the enterprise as opposed to a fund balance like in our general fund, just shy of $7.5 million. There you'll see our $10.9 million of resources, or all the revenues coming into that fund. We break it down between operating and capital expense there, 7.9 in operating, a little over $3 million for capital. And then our cash balance in the water fund will go down slightly just because we're investing a little bit more into the capital projects of the water fund next year. Moving on to wastewater, 2025 is the final year of implementation, if you will, from the wastewater rate study. So similarly to how the water fund rate structure or rate study was structured, it was a phase-in approach for us to get to that year of cost of service and achieve rates that were sustainable. 2025 gets us there in the wastewater fund. So in the back of my mind, I think, I wonder if it's time to maybe look at that rate study again. Maybe that's the next one we need to look at. But last year we did include an inflationary increase to the rates in the wastewater fund above what the rate study had told us, because that was done in 2019. So some of the inflationary assumptions that were done in 2019 weren't sufficient to cover all the bases. So I'm recommending that we do similar for 2025 that we did in 24 and increase a 5% rate increase for wastewater next year. What that would mean on a residential base charge is that could go from $42.55 up a little over $2 to $44.68. That same 5% is applied both on the volumetric charge as well as for commercial and the commercial usage as well. What that would mean is the wastewater fund would have revenue a little over $7.4 million. It's broken down a little differently than the water fund. We have operating major maintenance that really are the maintenance programs and projects of the wastewater fund, as well as capital replacement items. Some of those big pumps are extremely expensive, some of those items, and then system expansion. So we know we need to take care of treating the water now, planning to replace the things that are going to break, as well as planning for the future. And there at the bottom, the reason that we hold these revenues and need to cash balance for this fund is, think about its collection of the wastewater, it's being able to treat that wastewater, get it back to quality that it needs to be released into the river, and then have the maintenance component as well. So we do hold cash balance in this fund for those various reasons as well. Otherwise, pretty consistent operations with those inflationary cost increases, unless Robbie jumps up and down and has something different to say out there. Welcome to. A lot of big projects, though. So you'll see much less new capital projects as opposed to water, and rather wastewaters in the middle of some really big items. Planning for the plant expansion, that lagoon remediation. We had advanced $1 million of plant expansion money to look at that project. State Street sewer line replacement is big, as well as Ashcroft Draw replacement. So there's some big projects that were funded in 24 that will be carryover items in 25 that we'll talk about more and more because they're not done yet. And then additionally, annual sewer line maintenance, and then solids handling and dewatering for next year. Whoops. So what that looks like in summary for the wastewater fund, that cash balance next year, a little over $5 million. We'll have resources in of 7.4, and we'll spend in operating expenses $6.3 million, have $1.3 million of capital expenses, and our cash balance in that fund will go down a little bit as well as we invest into some of the capital expenses. You'll see those swings from year to year, mostly being in that capital expense line. So $12.5 million is what's funded this year. Not all of that will get done because they're multi-year projects, so we'll see that carry forward. Okay, last enterprise fund. Here's where the fun work is. Storm drainage is the fund that we have a little bit more work to do on. So it is our smallest enterprise fund. And so when we talk in percentages, the percentages are different than the dollar amounts than water and wastewater. Council has approved rate increases in this fund in 23 and 24. It was the rate study we did previously to water, so it's only a couple years old. And it set us on the trajectory for rates that we needed to be able to pay back the $8.6 million loan that we got from the state revolving fund to do the East Side Storm Drainage Project. And we've accomplished a lot of that work. We've received a lot of that money back. But what we were informed this year is our rate revenue is not sufficient to meet those debt covenants. So we had a difference of understanding in how we calculate gross revenue, net revenue, and what that percentage was in terms of things like an overhead transfer back to the general fund. Is that an ongoing operating expense? Is it not? Our auditors calculated it differently than we did. and we calculated it differently than the state did. So ultimately, the three of us got on the same page with our grantor funding source that does get to dictate how that calculation's done. And we do need to make an adjustment to our rates to meet that revenue requirement. Luckily for us, we had increased rates in 23 and again in 24, and so we could go to them and say, hey, we're making strides towards that. We need time to implement it. You know, we're marching towards that, and they were happy with that answer. But what we need to do now is dig in a little bit deeper and I think get us over the hump and make sure that we're at that revenue requirement. So if you think last week when Melanie Hobart spoke to revenue requirement, that really set the stage for this as well. What we need to do for these enterprise funds is really look at what is that revenue requirement to operate the fund, to meet our regulatory needs, to meet our operating needs and capital needs. And then we do back into those rates to see what that would mean for us to pay. So I did a similar process here. And where you have option is my calculation for rate revenue is that we need a 40% rate increase next year to get us over that hump to meet that regulatory level, if you will. Council could look at anything above that. I feel like my responsibility is to tell you what that minimum needs to be to achieve that and be sufficient there. So I've modeled what a 40% increase might look like and a 50% increase because, again, the percentages are scary, the dollars are less scary. So where we're at currently, 2024 rate for just a single family home or a manufactured home per unit per month, you're paying $13.99. So a 40% rate increase there in that middle would be a change of $5.59 per month. Not saying it's not small, but it feels less than you would, a 40% rate increase on water or wastewater would be significantly more than $5.59. So kind of just need to look at it fund by fund. If you wanted to look at what would a 50% rate increase mean, what could we do with that? That would be a rate increase of almost $7, so $6.99. It would mean the monthly storm drainage rate would be $20.96. That additional 10% rate increase in 2025 could give council a couple of options. One of those being in 2026 and out years until or unless council wanted to entertain taking on additional debt, doing a large tranche of storm drainage work where we would need debt again. You could look at holding rates steady for potentially years. What this does is help to infuse this fund with cash that we could do capital projects, maintenance that's been deferred for decades. And hopefully we would have less projects that we're spending millions and millions and millions of dollars on because we've kicked that maintenance down for years. So it would give us more money sooner to put back into that system, address maintenance items, and get a large amount of work done. Alternatively, you could do that 40% rate increase, and then we would meet that revenue sufficiency for the year. We would be in compliance with all of our grantors, and then you could look at year by year how that cash flow's coming in, if it's sufficient to do the capital and the maintenance that you would like done in the storm drainage system. In terms of total dollar amount, that 10% increase, if you were going to consider a 50% rate increase as opposed to a 40%, it would bring an additional $115,000 to the fund. And that would allow us to also look at funding an additional storm drainage FTE. So then we would have an additional personnel that could work on some of that drainage work and maintenance also without having to hire out all of it. You'll see the rates do become more significant as you go down that chart because they are not a volumetric rate like water and wastewater. Rather, it's the size of the lot. So larger commercial customers will pay a proportionately larger share because it's a flat percentage increased on each of their current rates. There are a couple of capital items that we can also incorporate into next year's plan with at least that 40% rate increase, additional storm line jetting, We've identified a priority project on 40th Street where storm drainage wasn't constructed properly decades ago. That does need to be rectified for local businesses or in that area that we would like to take care of next year. And then additionally, Cody had asked that we include on here a master plan for our east side storm drainage as well, as we're, like our strategic plan for the city, like some of the other master plans that we're doing, trying to create a good roadmap for where we're trying to get. And storm drainage is one that, as that fund grows, as the program becomes more formalized and we do more maintenance, that we need to make sure that we're checking in and what that future plan looks like also. In summary, you'll see the storm drainage fund will start next year with a very small beginning balance. $73,000 is what that will be, with at least I think I have a 50% rate increase in here. This modeled would be about a $1.8 million revenue to the fund. $1.3 million of operating expenses are planned in. That capital expense was only $350,000 that was on that previous slide. And that would allow us to bring that cash balance up to $251,000 as well. So again, if you were to look at a rate increase less than that's 50%, then it may swing by about $100,000. So the question for council, I thought I had one other slide on that, but I don't. Welcome. We've got time to talk about any of these factors, but are specifically asking for direction on storm drainage and what level you would like, or we can also model different rates or answer questions about what that might look like too.
Thank you. Appreciate it. Questions, comments?
So I have a question for the storm drainage. Apartments would fall into commercial, correct?
They do fall into commercial because it's not, you don't have a yard like single family home for the storm drainage system. Okay. Yeah.
So I'm trying to think how to word this, and I do apologize. So sorry. So for one of my buildings, for example, they're not paying just $85.62, correct? They're paying whatever portion, or is it a flat fee of $85.62 per building?
These are flat fee, I believe, per building. That would be.
Because what would help me see some of this, and I don't mind if you use one, is using one of our water bills so I could see, because it does help me explain it to the residents and ease it a little bit. But, if I could explain the rates better, it would help me.
Sure.
So.
Yeah, and if not, we can definitely look at that. It is a little bit different for the apartment complexes also, so we can do some modeling for that. Mm-hmm.
But so condos and apartments aside, what we'd be asking is our largest businesses total, if we went with 50%, they'd pay $42 more per year. Mm-hmm.
Per month.
Per month. Sorry, yeah, I meant month. But for the condos and it's per building.
I believe it is.
Per business.
Right.
Okay.
I could be wrong on that. We will definitely clarify.
Any other additional questions?
I have a couple. The spray truck, can we just give it to water for their second truck? That's a lot of water rate increases for 1 year.
It is.
That's not going to sit well.
That's exactly why I'm sitting here wondering this whole thing.
I was okay with the original rate, the 6% plus the $9. But now we're going to add another potentially $21 onto a bill. So with that family that uses under 4,000, that could potentially be like, that's a pretty large jump in their water bill. But I understand why. There's no other way that we can make that work. Because all we're going to do is pigeonhole problems.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
What we're doing is passing it along to the next mayors like it's been passed on to us.
Yes. And this is not a good situation.
Well, and I guess to your point, it's already gonna be not great. And at some point, you know, we've gotta be the one who rips the Band-Aid off and fixes the situation.
And
As long as it fixes the situation.
it's got to fix the situation, because I'm all for capital improvements. I think that being proactive rather than reactive is the way that every business and municipality should be ran. And having the funds out there just looks like, I'm just shocked that the previous boards have just allowed this to skate for so long. And now that we're stuck with the baton at the end.
Well, I think you hit the nail on the head when you're talking proactive versus reactive.
Mhm.
And there's been a lot over the last, 20 months that I know of, a lot of work to make up for all those times that the can was kicked down the road, right? And every time we kick the can down the road, it becomes a little bit more expensive to approach it.
Look at the park cleanups.
Absolutely.
We could have not done, whoever did the no mow versus just continually maintenancing things, we would not be in this situation.
Absolutely.
And it's easier to see little increments. That just doesn't sit well.
As far as previous boards though, I mean, we only
I understand.
do our decisions based off of the information that's been given to us.
Well, I tried 20 years ago to tell people there was a problem, and they chose to believe the good old boys and the political insiders, and I was vilified by the newspaper and everything. But now look, here we are. I'm having to sit here and make decisions to bring this up to par and keep passing more and more costs on to people. And I don't like it, but that's the way it's gotta be. If we're ever gonna try to get this under control.
And one of the things that I continually talk to my team about is, as we're bringing this information to you guys, leave nothing to the imagination. What is the situation? What is the business case we're trying to present? Because then that gives you guys a place to have different meaningful conversations at that point. And so my team has been very good at bringing the information that you guys need in order to make these difficult decisions. It's not easy, but I want to make sure nonetheless that you guys have the best information to make decisions off of.
Well, I think this goes back to the earlier statement that we need to do studies a lot more often than we've been doing in the past. I mean, just take, for example, on Wednesday, 20 years plus it was since that last study was done. You know, some of these other studies, 10 years, 12 years, and so on and so forth. This is where I think we really need to look at this and say, instead of doing it every 10 years, maybe every 5 years or every 3 years. I don't know what that may look like, but it can't be 10 years down the line, 20 years down the line. It needs to be maybe 5 at the max. And I'm glad that in the earlier slide that you were showing $100,000 set aside for these additional studies, which I think we need to start doing every year to make sure we can do these studies more often. This, to me, as Councilmember Neal stated, this is, and Crabtree stated as well, that that's a big increase. I mean, when you look at the numbers, yeah, it doesn't look huge, but people aren't going to look at that. They're going to see 40, 50%. And that's what they're going to say. And, I don't know. The 40, I think, is a little easier, but I understand that 50% will give us a little bit of a cushion. I don't know. I almost would say split the difference and make it 45.
I'd like to see a bill.
But
I'd like to see a mocked-up bill.
Really like to see
Because this is great, but
what it says. Yeah.
because I'm still having a hard time digesting the calculations of, my bill during the wintertime, $135. I'm going to layer on, and now we're up to 150, 160 plus a 6%. That's a pretty big jump.
It is.
And it's going to be hard when constituents come to us and say, why are you doing this?
Right.
But having a rolled up bill would be really helpful on the residential side, because
I agree with that. And I would like the commercial one because it does affect my people.
of course it does.
And I've got to have an answer for them.
And if it's per building, I mean, look at your $100. Well, $42.
Yeah, but if, like,
Per month.
and where it affects me because commercial, we also have the water rates that we just talked about going up. So not only this, we have the storm drainage. If I can't explain it to people, so it would help to see a bill for commercial and residential.
The numbers make sense. It just is an uncomfortable position to be in.
It is for sure, and apologize for not including it in here. I had Donna kind of mock average single-family home utility bill at a water usage of 9,200 gallons, so not even
Perfect.
a 4,000. And so at a current rate, using 9,200 gallons, they're paying $182.96.
Okay?
And that would go up by $18.87. So it'd be 201.83.
Not with the drainage as well, right?
Yes, with a $5.59 with a 40% rate increase.
40% rate increase,
The
plus the 6% for the drinking water, plus the $9. Did you get all that?
just double checking that I have the water rate. in
That
there.
isn't as scary now.
Right, the percentages sound scary when you say, oh, 5% in wastewater, 40% in storm, the 6% in water, and then we've yet to finalize the refuse fund. What I'm hoping is that we can
That's another.
only look at, we will have inflationary costs from waste management. If we do nothing different for next year, we're still expecting a 5% increase from them as well. It's built into our contract that they can add the trash and recycling CPI. They're at a different index than us. But I think it's safe to say, a $20 a month increase is probably what this would all turn out to be. Now I'm looking at the water rate, it might be slightly more than that. But we're talking in the $20 range as opposed to 30, 40, if that at least helps. And I'm happy to finalize this single family home bill and look at what the commercial would look like for you as well. And
And I would like to see it at the 50% rate.
okay,
Me personally,
do both, yeah.
I mean,
I think it'd
It's
be
a
great.
$1.40 difference.
it's nothing.
Well,
Well, it's
yeah.
something, but you know,
no,
it's,
no, no,
yeah,
the only,
yeah.
the only thing is it's kind of like why you go to a store and you pay $4.99 instead of $5.
Yes.
There is a psychological thing
Yeah.
about 50%. So yes, I agree with you. It literally doesn't mean anything. It's less than, I don't know what you can buy for $2 anymore, but,
It's still an increase.
and it
nice
still is a
seafood
50% increase.
the percentages I'm not worried about. You can layer that data however. I just want to make sure that we're not going overboard as we're pushing these new rates to our consumers and that people can still afford the bill. That's my biggest thing. And especially for fixed income, people on a tight budget, the economics of today are pretty rough. So even that $25 per month could mean a lot to a family.
Absolutely.
And
Or do we have, again, is there any kind of incentives that we can find or see if we can participate in for people with, fixed incomes that can kind of help?
We've
with
tried
these-
on the water conservation side, we're good to give information at the customer service window for LEAP, for, the county programs. When people call, especially in the wintertime, we do hear it. And so we try to, provide resources. We have handouts. We have some of that.
Well,
as
water is
well.
hard when it comes to water, just because LEAP, your heating source, right? And there's other utility assistance out there, but for the most part, water is a difficult one, and it typically comes from a city. And so that's why I was just kind of curious I don't know what other cities are doing, to help people with fixed incomes.
I've never heard of anything like that.
Well,
What other
there's-
municipalities offer discounts to? Usually that's a
Well,
government.
resources. There are some that do pay water, that help with water bills for, for clients that are not able, and that would help. But I'm just curious, like locally within our area, if there's something that we can offer. And it doesn't necessarily have to come out of, the city is in essence finding some organization where we can partner with them to help kind of our community members that are in a bind.
I think information's the most important to letting people know it's happening, but I also think that the city can do something along the lines of an educational system of how to cut water usage. So ever since this conversation's been surfaced, we use a massive amount of water at our home. I'm thinking about ripping out grass and going zero scape.
Right.
So, but that's all I have, question wise, except for the master plans. Why do we need to spend $200,000 for 2 different master plans? I'm all for master plans. $100,000 per master plan? And how long is that good
Which
for?
ones? Are you talking for the
Yeah,
street sales tax and the mill levy?
so master plans are great. They give a great forward lens.
Mhm.
But I'm just shocked at their expense. And how long is that master plan good for? 2 years, 5 years?
So he's talking about parks and then the,
Yeah, all the master plans for 100,000.
And then we added the
Strategic
strategic.
master plans. And I'm all for master plans. I love master plans because they're outside perspective and they give us a roadmap to go using the right velocity and trajectory. But that seems like a lot of money.
Right, so I've asked for 100,000 be put in for the park system master plan. Our current plan is 25 years old.
This is why.
Exactly.
Same song, second verse, right?
Yep. Okay.
And so then if we go forward to the strategic plan, my thinking behind that is for the last 2 years, we've been working towards economic development, and community beautification. Those have been everything, we've put everything behind. As we welcome a new council here over the next couple of months, this will be the opportunity for the council to go, okay, do we want to stay on that path? Or do we want to, change that trajectory? Do we want to create a strategic plan for the next 5 years to help us achieve X? So quite honestly, Councilman, those 100,000,
Doesn't.
Yeah, and this,
Thank you
and
for
this
that
goes,
clarification.
yes, sir.
Those are
goes
just
back
big
to-
numbers.
this goes back to doing them more often, because I think if we do them more often,
It'll get cheaper.
it's gonna save us money in the long run, because we only have to make minor modifications to it, rather than doing a whole master plan from scratch again.
Yeah, so if we look at the comprehensive plan, one of the things that I'm pushing in community development, we'll be welcoming a new director here at the end of the month, but looking at our comprehensive plan on an annual basis to ensure that we're not getting 5, 6, 7 years down the road and questioning the legitimacy of that plan, right? So if we can put eyes on it more frequently and ensure that we're still working towards the city council's goals and objectives for land development, I think that helps stay in front of that. The strategic plan would be a much smaller window. It'd be a 5-year window that we'd be looking at. What do we really want to get in and attack over the next 5 years to achieve X, right? And so what I'm trying to do from a city management perspective is take this body, but also this organization in a much more strategic direction, right? Where do we want to be in 5 years? And you guys will often hear me ask that when we're talking policy. Where do you want to be in 5 years, 10 years, 20 years? Honestly, we need to be looking 5 years out, because if we're focused on today, we're already behind. And so that's the idea behind it.
I have a question, going back to this storm drainage fund. So in the little statement there at the bottom about the 115,000 with the 50%, when we are saying consider significantly lower annual increases, what are we talking about, maybe percentage wise or dollar? Because that's what's significantly. What are we?
Sure. No, thank you for that question. Honestly, council could look at, my hope is that if even at the 40% level or the 50% level, because we would be achieving where we needed to be for 26's rates, no matter which option you choose, or somewhere's in the middle even, you could go then, we could look at inflationary markets, costs, capital projects, needs of that system. And if that revenue requirement for 2026 says, hey, we have sufficient money to do what we need to do next year, council could look at holding rates. So significantly lower, meaning that could be zero.
That's what I wanted to get clarified on that, because I'm like, what does that look like? So
what do you think the top would be? We do 40%, not do the 50%. You're looking at up to 10% then?
No, I think in either structure, council would have the ability to have, because you'd be ripping that Band-Aid off, like we said, you would have that cash inflow into the storm drainage fund. You really will have the resources, I hope, next year, that in 2026, when we're sitting here a year from now, I can say, great, the revenue looks sufficient next year to pay for ongoing normal operations. And unless we want to look at another huge tranche of capital projects, a lot of new staff, a lot of new equipment, something, big, or inflation's 15%, then we'd have some factors to address at that point. But all things constant for today, my hope is that we could maybe even look a couple of years without increasing. And that is the education piece that we can also help to communicate. You're not going to have, we don't plan to have a 40% or 50% rate increase every year over year for 5 years. We really are investing one large chunk into this fund to get us where we need to be, so that one fund is sufficient for a few years, barring any craziness.
It's like what you said. It's like, what is the revenue requirements to meet our regulatory needs, right? And it's like we have to, unfortunately, do it this time around to get there, and we've been behind.
But the years that we haven't raised it has got us into this situation.
Right.
So, I mean, I would not want to say, okay, well, let's do 40%, and then in 2 years we might not raise it at all. I mean, we have inflationary on every year. So, I mean, at least 2 or 3% every year would be a lot better than here's your 40% because we didn't raise it.
I agree with you. I agree.
I'm at splitting the difference and making it 45.
Well, I'm in the bad situation of, I would rather be remembered as making the hard decision to raise it rather than say, let somebody else deal with it, which is exactly what they've done in the past, because I've sat there and listened to them say that. And now it comes to this council and it's on my shoulders to say, hey, we're gonna have to raise this no matter what, because we just can't sustain constantly, and let somebody else deal with it.
And also to Mayor Pro Tem's point too, I think some of us that have been on council for a while are in that same situation, because we only can make decisions with the information that we're given to, and unfortunately, we may not have been given probably the best information at that time for whatever reason, and we may have contributed some of that, but at this point in time, I mean, we're kind of stuck with what do we do? But like I said, I'm really for splitting it right down the middle at 45.
And then doing 5% next year,
That
and then doing 5% next year. Because
Or
I'd
less.
rather be,
or less, depending on what this can look like.
I just want to be ahead of the,
I want to be ahead, but I also don't want it to really. Because we know the difference. $1.40 is but they're not looking at $1.40. They're going to see 40 and 50%, and
Yeah.
that's what they're going to see. Even though we know that's what all they say is 40, 50%.
And so looking at splitting that difference, that it'd be a $6.29 per month increase. So your storm charge then would be, let's say, $20.26. What that would mean on this average bill, water rates are in there, right? It would be an increase of $19.59 if we split it. So
Sorry,
your
Jackie.
$18.89 increase on this, example, $19.59 or $20.29, depending if you were at 40, 45, or 50%.
People rather would see 19 than 20. I'm just saying,
I understand. I understand.
but that's just my opinion. I mean, I'm only one of 7, so.
Well, Fred, you never gave us a number. Mr. Neal?
Well, I didn't think everybody else had given a number, but I can split the difference too. Although 50% kind of sticks in my craw too, but it's what's necessary, unfortunately.
It is, yeah.
And
I don't be put in this situation.
we've been selected, I guess, as the council that makes some tough decisions.
That's why they pay us the big bucks.
Yeah.
What about you, Councilmember Crabtree? You're putting everybody else on the spot?
I haven't heard from the rest of you. Are we moving on now?
I'm fine with 45, but I'd rather see 50.
Likewise.
I would rather see 50 as well. The reason why is because although, it's not like for the next couple years, not increase it at a high level, but still have an increase. So at least we can continue with that trajectory that we have currently. I know the increase will be hard, but it's needed.
It's beyond needed.
And so for me, in good conscience, I can't just say, oh yeah, let's go with the lower rate when I know it's needed. And yes, it's gonna sting right now, but in the future, it will help substantially.
I would like to see 45 with a couple percentage rate increases through the next couple of years.
And I'm for that
Or just
too.
rip the Band-Aid off completely and go 50 and keep next year and the following year low for maintenance purposes.
You too? We haven't heard from you, both.
I'm waiting for Laura.
Why?
I just like to hear the opinions. I'm good with 50. I don't like it, but we need it, so let's just do it.
I'm along the same lines. I hate to do this. I mean, I paid 2 water bills. So I hate to do this. But I also want to make sure that, this is memorable enough for council that there isn't any stagnant years in the future, that we're always
On top of it.
on top of it.
So 50. Okay. Tammy's at 50.
50.
50. 50. Okay. 50.
That direction.
So I had one more question though.
Of course.
I'm sorry, now that that's done. We budgeted $500,000 for a replacement on Renaissance Park. We have never in recent years gotten a quote for a park revision that's been under 600,000. It's been 650, so we just spent 700 on one. Why are we at 500?
It's probably because it's
Well, we're spending
replacements.
700 on Ridge Park because we have the donation from Chevron. What you guys actually budgeted for Ridge Park was 350,000. So that Chevron donation was able to double it.
Yeah. And the other parks were the same story, was that it was way more than 500,000.
Mhm.
So I just want to, I just want to make everyone aware that when we say $500,000, that it usually isn't $500,000. It's a lot more.
It does say replacements because we're not like full on constructing like a brand new park.
Yeah, so we'd be looking at removal of the existing playground, removal of the swings, removal of the pull in place. The reason why we're at 500 is there is $61,000 left over. So there's literally nowhere else to go.
Okay. That's 500 because that's what we have.
Yeah.
Got it.
This will be a great project for the Parks and Rec Committee to be tackling in the future there, because they'll be able to look at that and make some of those tough decisions.
Absolutely.
So
I hear you 100%, right? Looking at Ridge Park, $700,000. Coming from the Conservation Trust Fund, though, what the council budgeted for 2024 was $350,000. So this is even pushing that a little bit, but we are at our top end.
Dante Park was pretty pricey. So was Welch Park. I'm just
You mean
pointing out that-
Da Vinci?
Yeah, Da Vinci.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, Da Vinci was 650, is what we had budgeted.
And Welch Park was pretty pricey, and that doesn't even have playground equipment, so. I just wanted to point out that I thought 500,000 was relatively low for a park replacement.
We can look at it, we can get some concepts and see what that looks like and have the Parks and Recreation Advisory Board work through this challenge and see what we come up with.
If we end the year with additional revenues, or, you know, we end in a better place, and that might be something we can add on the list for consideration in the spring to see if that's sufficient, or kind of what direction that park.
Maybe find
To go.
some kind of donations from other companies as well.
Sure.
So, is that all on?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, the one other thing that I had that's not to do with water is we end up with $193,000 left in the budget next year. And my only question is, and I'm not picking on vehicles, it's just math is easy this way. We could literally do everything that's on our unfunded asset requests, except for the vehicles, with that leftover $193,000.
I wanted to leave that open in case there was something on this list. I mean, the budget is far from finalized. You know, you could say scrap half of the one-time list and do this instead. You do have the ability to add something. We can continue to use more of that 193,000. We could save it to look at Renaissance Park. Really up for council direction on what you'd like to do with that additional. Absolutely. It's way back. I thought.
And again, I just want to make it clear, I'm not saying throw away all the vehicles. I'm just saying that's just really easy math for me.
That's a great
Right.
suggestion, though.
Yeah.
Right.
I like the budget the way it sits. And I like having some money for a rainy day. I know we have another bucket for that, but I don't like running budgets so thin.
Yeah, agree.
It's not a good business practice.
The first version of it with positive numbers, I gave to our finance manager, Elsa Caro, and I said, here, look at balances. And it was balanced by like, what, $174? And she goes, no.
That is too close.
We're really squeezing everything we
Squeezing
can to get the
every little-
most.
It's too
of
close for
everything. Yeah,
comfort.
but-
We are pushing the budget. We are doing things that
But this
needed to
but
be
this
done for a
also
long
is
time.
A good thing though is because there's a lot of needs a lot of things that have been needed over the years that just never got there. It never got to the point where we are. So now we're actually going, what does the city need? What does the staff need? What does each department actually need to get their job done and go out there and make the community beautiful and what it's going to take? And unfortunately, it's come down to this. We need to spend the money in order to make all of this stuff happen.
And I will say the staff does a very good job of looking at how we can save money. Hopefully you saw the two new trucks when you came in tonight. We have received Chevy 6500 and two Chevy 5500s in lieu of two of the dump trucks. One was a tandem axle, one was a single axle. Those three trucks will be much more versatile than the two big dump trucks. My concern was every day that a dump truck sits, it's costing us money. We get these out in the field, we get them put to work. Those dump trucks are producing a return for us.
Right.
Those dump trucks, Ty, correct me if I'm wrong, saved about $125,000 by going this route. Now, we're still going to get two of the bigger trucks. We're still going to get two of the bigger tandem axles. They'll come off the assembly line in October. Go for, we're going to look at upfitting options. But just an example of where we're also, once this is approved, we're also looking at how can we save money to produce the long-term benefits for the community. So I'm really proud of staff for that example. I mean, that's a great example. So
I just have to say, it's great for us as a council to be a part of this decision-making and allocating funds that benefit the city. Because honestly, before, we just looked at numbers and just kind of went with it. Cool, looks great. And this feels good because, again, it gives us like that vested interest and that buy-in to say, okay, we're doing something. And unfortunately, we weren't able to ensure that certain things were done previously, but I think moving forward with the staff that we have, with the leadership that we have, we're able to make those strides. Slow, but we'll get there. So thank you.
well, and from my perspective, if we can give you water information, if we can give you wastewater or stormwater information, and I can see you wince a little bit.
Yeah.
I know we've given you some good numbers because you're feeling the numbers
Yes.
at that point, and that's a different level of decision making. right? If you're getting the full picture, if you're feeling what that increase looks like, then that is a different level of decision making, and I think that puts us on a much more productive path. Now, I'd also like to jump over and talk about something real quick, Mayor, if you don't mind. We had talked up there about the phasing for 37th Street, so I just want to go over this real quick because we've had some internal conversations. But next year, so what we're in the process doing is we are in the process of finishing Phase 2A, which goes from Sienna Avenue to Stampede Drive. Next year, what the plan was to jump out to 65th Avenue, rebuild that intersection to the westernmost entrance of Arrowhead subdivision. That was due in large part to grant funding requirements. We've taken a hard look at that, and what I would recommend we do, and what we're planning on, unless we hear otherwise, is doing Phase 2B next year in 2025 and getting everything on 37th Street done between 35th and 47th. And then in 2026, jumping out and working on the improvements at 65th Avenue and rebuilding that intersection and that stretch. Once that is done, the only portion that we have remaining will be really right there in front of Arrowhead up to the roundabout, which we know has a couple of bridges that are involved, wetlands. It's going to be a much more involved process. But I think next year, 2025, jumping, just finishing that Phase 2B, getting this portion done, I think that opens it up better to economic development, better service, better level of service for our residential subdivisions, Liberty Draw in that area, but also for the greater potential for commercial economic development. Then in 26, we jump out and hit 65th. We're already working with the MPO to redirect those funds, and I think we've got everything taken care of from that perspective.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
That's logical, but granted, I know that certain grants are not so much.
Well,
We're working.
yeah, and then there was a fantastic presentation at the CTAB last week.
Thank you. I appreciate you.
And one of the things that we talked about was the availability of funding versus in relation to the demand for projects that we have over the next couple of years. And I think by moving these pieces around a little bit, by changing the phasing, I think we're going to get better use out of those funds. I think we're going to be able to have less reliance on the general fund for street maintenance, but really be able to allocate those sales tax dollars more efficiently for the public, which I think is huge as we go out for another consideration for the extension of that sales tax.
Well, it's funny you mentioned that because I was going to bring that up in council discussion about our discussion with Paul at the MPF.
Oh, I won't say any more. I will act surprised when you
No,
mention
no,
it.
yeah. Well, I'm not going to bring it up now. You did. So, but no, we talked about that, and Paul, the new director of the MPO, he was very receptive to that idea of doing that. And I know Mark Overschmidt's working with Becky Carrasco from there and trying to work that out. But the other thing that we discussed about that too is we know about that bridge work, and that's what $20-30 million project that we talked about.
It's sizable.
They're looking at maybe we could partner with like Weld County or something like that, because I don't know where we're going to get that money for it, and that would be something that we'd have to probably partner up with them to get that replaced and find out what other grants are out there utilizing their networks as well, and because that's partnership with the entire county, because they want that 4-lane highway too. So
Being a reliever, I think there's some importance there.
But also congressional money to help with infrastructure bridges.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, there are a few other bridge options once we get a little bit closer to that project too.
Anything else? What's that?
Hit up the Arrowhead residents.
Right. All right.
Thank you
Great.
for the question.
Great presentation. Thank you for putting that together and everybody that helped work on it staff-wise. So thank you.
All right. Ad hoc committee has finalized the draft ordinance, and you have seen it at this point. If you remember, on June 25th, we had a lengthy conversation, 2 hours long, about everything that we needed, council wanted done. The ad hoc committee also added to that list. Then Drew and Cody, as well as myself, went through it and cleaned it up and ended up making a pretty light document that I feel really sums up every need that we wanted. There isn't any other ordinances that overstep this one, so we don't have to go back and clean anything up. This is something that is packaged up nice and neat for your consideration. And I would answer any questions that you might have. Or I'm not going to go line by line by this because you've seen it. But is there any concerns or anything that I've missed?
There was a few concerns, but you and I discussed those. I've fielded a couple phone calls and,
Yep.
an individual that left a message for council last week. Her and I had a really good discussion, and I kind of went through over it with her, and that seemed to put her in a lot of ease. And then she said she was going to talk to some of her neighbors that were concerned about it. So it sounded like the information that was provided put a lot of people at ease on it. I know there were some concerns in the beginning that, you know, what was the intent of the city, but I think at the end of it, when they saw that there's really no restrictions on the amount, there's no setbacks, there's no fence.
It's not
It's not like
complicated.
that. It was more focused and concentrating on making sure you keep your vehicles registered, upkept, make it look nice, you know, don't do that, and storage lived in, which I think everybody was in agreement on that, and I think this covers it very well. So I think you and the committee did a really great job on putting this, and from what I understand, there's really no pushback from any of the committee members at the last meeting.
No, everyone voted yes for this to pass, or for us to send it up to this.
And I'm not going to overstep a citizens advisory committee that was theirs to showcase for the residents and say, no,
No, yeah, we're not, I don't feel that we need to go back to
Okay.
change anything. I think the ad hoc committee did a phenomenal job. The feedback was great. We have a great document to support it. It gets our goals in alignment, their goals are in alignment, and overall, it was a great experience. But yeah, there's only one little typo that was changed, and other than that, we're ready to send it up to turn it into an ordinance and enforce it.
Jeff, I thought originally we had a couple of ordinances that were slightly in conflict.
They are not in this document.
I think we have to clean up a couple little
Yeah.
things in another code.
Yeah, we may need to take a look at Title 10.
10, yeah.
If I recall, there's a little bit of language in Title 10 that spoke to storage of RVs. I haven't looked at that recently, but we can get that taken care of. That would be pretty inconsequential.
Won't need that coming up, popping up its ugly head in the future if they're listening.
No, and I think from an enforcement perspective, I think this is very well contained. I think everything right here is what we need. We can enforce this. I just want to verify that Title 10 doesn't have any conflictual language.
The reason I brought that up.
I thought we did that.
Remember somebody said.
Because you and I went through everything. Yeah, that's why. Yeah, that's fine. But I thought you and I had already done it.
I think overall, though, this draft ordinance, for the way it's presented right now, is actually pretty clear and concise, and it actually gives a map and a footprint for actually code enforcement to enforce it without really any gray areas in it. It's pretty black and white and say, okay, this is what it is.
So, and just a little backstory with that. The last ordinance I was completely against because I felt we overstepped, we infringed. There was a lot of verbiage in it that just didn't make sense. And this new ordinance really seals up all of the desires. We don't want you living in your trailer, but we understand that things might happen. So we've been really generous with a couple of things. 4 opportunities a year to have 7 days in your trailer if you have residents that are hanging out. It's all just a clean way to just beautify Evans and to make sure that we're not overstepping our bounds with anyone. And everyone has parking. So if you are a small business and you have a trailer and you park it in your driveway, great. Enjoy it. And this doesn't even talk about putting in your backyard. We're not even looking at that. It's just what we can see from the streets. Any other questions?
What were some of the grievances that you all talked about with constituents or community members?
So you field one of them.
Yeah,
I
so-
fielded a couple of them.
The individual I talked to, well, actually a couple of individuals that I talked to, they were really concerned that we were going to be restricting like the number that they could have on their property, that we were going to make them put in the backyard fenced. those were their biggest concerns, that they were not gonna be able to park there. There was gonna be a size restriction, so say, I don't know the sizes of RVs, so I'm just gonna use an example. They have a 25-foot RV, that they weren't gonna be able to park that on their driveway, even if it fit. They would have to take it to a storage unit. Or if they had they would have to put it in their backyard and build a fence around it. There was a lot of, or, hey, I have an RV and a trailer, so you're telling me I can have one or the other, so I have to make a decision on where to spend money. I have to store one to keep the other. Those were their biggest concerns, that we were really trying to restrict and making them take their RVs or their trailers and put them in a storage unit where they'd have to pay money.
Thank you.
Thank you for your time.
Thank you to the committee and,
Oh, the committee was phenomenal.
you know,
Yeah, we're gonna try to see if we can't put like a certificate or something and recognize the committee members at another council meeting, just thank them for their time and everything, but, yeah, no, appreciate your work, appreciate their work, so.
So my plan is to have this on the agenda for September 17th for first reading, council consideration. Go from there.
Oh, with that being
Ready?
said, we got
Okay.
about 45 minutes, grab yourself some food, there's tons of it back there, so.
Awesome, thank you.
Promptly at 7. Good job.